Nature is not a temple, but a workshop, and man's the workman in it. That's Evan Turgenev.
It's a powerful quote, isn't it? Suggests things aren't static, that human interaction can lead to, well, unexpected results.
Exactly. Unexpected, sometimes really mysterious things happening right under our noses. Welcome, everyone, to The Deep Dive. Today, we're jumping into a story that honestly sounds like something out of folklore, but it's grounded in some really fascinating recent science. And we're basing this exploration on some excellent source material from IDR. This kind of deep dive is genuinely useful. It touches on current affairs, science, environmental issues. If you're studying for exams, say the UPSC, tackling topics like this really helps build that broad knowledge base. Good for prelims, mains.
And frankly, just for understanding the complex world around us.
Totally. So our mission today, unpack the mystery of this creature found in Brazil. One that just didn't seem to belong. It kicked off back in 2021, near Vacaria, down in southern Brazil. An animal gets hit by a car, found injured.
Right. And immediately there was something off about it.
Off how?
Well, the people who found it, the vets who started treating it, they saw it wasn't acting quite like a typical domestic dog, but it didn't look exactly like the local wild foxes either, the pampas foxes they'd know.
So a real puzzle from the start.
Precisely. It had this mix of features, both physical and behavioral. That's what really got everyone thinking, asking questions. Because, when experienced wildlife vets are scratching their heads, unable to just say, oh, it's X or it's Y.
Something unusual is going on.
Exactly. I mean, dogs, wolves, foxes, they're all canids, sure. They share ancestry way back. But millions of years of evolution separate them. They have distinct looks, distinct behaviors.
So for this one animal to blur those lines.
It suggested that maybe, just maybe, those species barriers weren't quite as solid as we thought, at least in this instance.
Okay, so this initial puzzle really pushed things forward. They didn't just shrug it off.
No, they took it seriously. The animal was transferred to researchers at local universities for a much closer look, a scientific look.
And that's where the story gets even wilder, right? The scientific findings.
Absolutely extraordinary, really. They did detailed genetic analysis. And it wasn't just, an odd-looking individual of a known species. It was confirmed as a hybrid.
A hybrid? Between what?
The offspring of a domestic dog, Canis lupus familiaris, and a pampas fox like Halopex gymnocercus.
Wow, a pampas fox.
Yeah.
That's a wild South American canid, right? Native to the grasslands there. Quite different from a dog.
Very different. And this finding, this confirmation, was huge.
Did they give it a name? It feels like something this unique needs a name.
They did. It's been nicknamed the Dogxim.
Dogxim. Okay, I see it. Dog and sim from.
Dogxim do Campo. That's the local Portuguese name for the pampas fox. So dog plus sim.
Clever. And this wasn't just speculation. It's scientifically documented.
Oh, yeah. Published in the journal Animals back in 2023. Properly peer-reviewed, and importantly reported as the first ever documented case of a hybrid between these two species.
Okay, hold on. This is where my mind starts spinning a bit. Dogs and pampas foxes. They're different species. You said millions of years of divergence. What did the research say, like 6.7 million years?
Around that, yes. A very long time in evolutionary terms.
And they even have different numbers of chromosomes, don't they? So how is a hybrid even biologically possible?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It really makes you think about what defines a species and reproductive barriers. It shows that sometimes, even after millions of years apart, hybridization can happen. It's rare, but possible. And in this specific case, the chromosome count was incredibly revealing. The Dogxim had 76 chromosomes.
76, and how does that compare?
Well, domestic dogs usually have 78. Pampas foxes have 74.
76 is exactly halfway between them.
Precisely. That specific number, 76, was a massive clue, a really strong indicator that this was likely a first-generation hybrid, getting a set from each parent species.
Wow. Okay, so the chromosome count was like Exhibit A. What other genetic proof did they find?
They used a couple of standard but powerful genetic tools. First, they looked at the mitochondrial DNA, the mtDNA.
Right, and that comes only from the mother, doesn't it?
Almost exclusively, yes.
Yeah.
So analyzing the Dogxim's mtDNA showed its maternal line, its mother, was a pampas fox.
Okay, so mom was the wild fox. Then the dad must have been the domestic dog. How did they lock that down?
That's where the nuclear DNA analysis comes in. Nuclear DNA is in the cell nucleus. You get half from each parent. They looked at the overall chromosome structure, the karyotype, like a map of the chromosomes. It showed a mix. Characteristics from both dog and pampas fox chromosomes were present.
A mixed map.
Exactly. And they also looked at specific genetic markers, polymorphisms. Think of them as unique flags at certain points in the DNA. The Dogxim had versions of these markers, these flags, that are characteristic of dogs, and other versions characteristic of pampas foxes. It inherited one type from dad dog, another from mom fox.
So it had both sets of flags, proving contribution from both sides.
Definitely. It was heterozygous for those markers, meaning it had one variant from each parent species. Absolutely conclusive proof of biparental inheritance.
That is just incredible detective work.
Yeah.
Not just based on looks, but solid genetics.
Yeah.
But speaking of looks, what did the Dogxim look and act like? Did it obviously take after one parent more?
It was a real mix, quite fascinating. Physically, its morphology, it seemed to lean a bit more towards the pampas fox. It had that longer, narrower snout, quite large, pointed ears, and the fur was thicker, coarser, more like the wild fox. Slender build, too.
Okay, so looked maybe more fox-like, but behavior.
Yeah.
Any dog traits peek through.
Yes. Interestingly, the researchers, the caretakers, they noted it would bark, which isn't typical for pampas foxes, and it apparently showed interest in playing with toys. That's much more of a domestic dog kind of behavior.
Barking and playing, that's definitely leaning towards the dog side. I think I read a quote from Flavia Ferrari, who helped care for it. She described it as timid and cautious, not as docile as a dog, but also lacking the expected aggression of a wild canid. She called it not a dog, not a fox, but an incredible hybrid.
Yeah, that quote really captures it, doesn't it? That in-between nature they observed.
It does. Any other behavioral quirks mentioned?
There was one about feeding mentioned in the source material. They tried offering it dog food, kibble, but it strongly preferred eating live rodents.
So that wild prey drive was still very strong, definitely from the fox side.
Clearly. So you get this complex picture, this mosaic of traits, physically and behaviorally, from both parents.
So we have this one-off, scientifically proven hybrid. But presumably this isn't something people were seeing all the time before. Why now? What allowed this rare event to happen?
Well, stepping back and looking at the context the source material provides, the scientists involved pretty directly towards increasing human influence. It seems strongly linked to the growing overlap between where people live and work and natural habitats.
You mean human expansion, pushing into wilder areas. How does that cause this specifically?
Think about it. Pampas foxes live in grasslands, open areas, but they're adaptable. They can survive on farmland, pastures, even on the edges of towns. As our towns grow, as we convert more land for agriculture or development, we're basically pushing our environments right up against theirs. This means domestic animals, maybe free-roaming dogs, for instance, are just physically encountering wild species like pampas foxes much more often than they would have historically.
Right. So it's simply increasing the probability of encounters because the buffer zone is shrinking or gone.
Precisely. As one expert, Jacqueline Boyd, put it in the source, the Dogxim's existence probably reflects increased contact between wild and domestic animals. It's sort of an expected, though maybe extreme, consequence of human expansion, but it definitely raises some serious concerns beyond just being a biological curiosity.
Okay, what kind of concerns are we talking about when wild and domestic species mix more often?
The research highlights a couple of big ones. First is disease transmission. Domestic animals can carry diseases that wildlife haven't been exposed to, and vice versa. More contact means more chances for pathogens to jump species. This could be devastating for wild populations, especially if they have no natural immunity. It's a major worry for conservation.
Makes sense. And the second concern?
Displacement of wildlife. Simply put, as humans and our pets and livestock move into an area, there's less space, less food, fewer resources for the native animals. This encroachment can push wildlife out, shrink their populations, and ultimately contribute to biodiversity loss.
And now hybridization is potentially another consequence on that list.
Exactly. This Dogxim existed. It sadly died in 2023, apparently from unknown causes. But the fact that it could exist at all, it raises a really critical question.
Which is?
Well, the research really pushes us to ask, what if these hybrids can reproduce? What if the Dogxim or others like it are fertile?
Right. What would that mean?
What does that imply for the genetic future? The conservation of the wild pampas fox population, especially in these areas where human impact is growing. Hybridization can dilute the unique gene pool of a wild species. It might introduce traits that aren't actually helpful for survival in the wild. And in a worst-case scenario, if hybrids are successful and breed back into the wild population, you could get something called genetic swamping.
Genetic swapping.
Yeah, where the distinct genetic identity of the native wild species essentially gets blurred or even lost over time.
That's a really profound concern. It takes this single weird animal discovery
Yeah.
and makes it a potential warning sign.
It does. It turns this rare biological event into a really powerful symbol, actually, of the wider pressures that human activity puts on ecosystems.
It shows how delicate the balance is and how altering landscapes can have these complex knock-on effects we might not even predict.
Our footprint is bigger and more complicated than we often think.
Well, this whole deep dive, exploring the Dogxim, its discovery, its implications, it was all drawn from that valuable source material provided by IDR. It really highlights the kind of insights you can get into science, the environment, current affairs topics that are so relevant, whether you're studying for something like the UPSC or just want to be informed about the world.
Absolutely.
The story of the Dogxim really brings that Turgenev quote back to mind, doesn't it? Nature as a workshop, constantly being reshaped, sometimes unintentionally, by human hands. And it leaves us with a pretty big thought to chew on. As the boundaries between the human world and the wild world continue to blur, how do we manage the consequences, the ones we know about, and maybe the ones, like the Dogxim, that are still emerging? If you found this exploration as fascinating as we did, and you want to keep up with important topics for general knowledge or maybe your exam prep, please do give this deep dive a like. Definitely subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our future explorations. And please, use the comments below. Ask questions, suggest other topics you'd like us to dive into. We really want to hear from you.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the sometimes strange and challenging places where the wild and human worlds meet, brought into focus by the science from IDR. Until next time.